Hey everyone, want to unlock some next level happiness?
Yeah.
Well, today we're diving into the really cool connections between Buddhism, psychology, and neuroscience. How these all can actually help you live a more fulfilling life. And to guide us, we're going to be checking out Robert Wright's book, Why Buddhism is True. Now, don't worry, we're not trying to convert anyone here. We're going to be breaking down the core ideas like meditation and that whole not self concept to see if they actually hold up. Do they really make sense with what we know from modern science? And more importantly, can you actually use these ideas to make your own life better?
Exactly. It's all about taking these ancient concepts and seeing how they apply to our modern lives.
Totally. So, Wright starts off with this really interesting comparison. He says life is kind of like the movie The Matrix, where what you think is real isn't really real. He's suggesting that we're all kind of operating under illusions, not really seeing the true nature of our minds or even the world around us.
It's like we're trapped in this simulation, so caught up in our thoughts that we totally miss the bigger picture.
Okay, so can you give us some examples of these illusions in, everyday life?
Well, think about cravings. Like those times you just have to have that bag of chips or that sugary drink. We all know rationally that those things aren't good for us in the long run, right?
Yeah.
But there's that allure, that salty, crunchy, sugary goodness. It's like our brains are hardwired to chase that instant gratification,
Mm-hmm.
even if it doesn't lead to any real happiness.
Well, tell me about it. I know I'll feel so much better after a salad, but sometimes those chips just call my name.
Right. And that's just natural selection doing its thing. See, for our ancestors, survival meant constantly chasing those short-term rewards,
Mm.
finding food, shelter. So it makes sense that we're programmed for that quick dopamine hit, even if it's not the best thing in the long run.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. But if we're kind of hardwired that way, is there any hope for us? How do we break free? Wright talks about meditation as one way to do this, but he's also really honest about his own struggles with it. He compares himself to a hot-headed basketball coach, which I find hilarious and relatable. It shows you don't have to be like a Zen master to benefit.
Absolutely. And he makes this really important point that meditation isn't about emptying your mind, which is what so many people think. It's more about noticing your thoughts
Yeah.
without getting, totally swept away by them.
So it's kind of like those pop-up ads on your phone. You see them, you know they're there, but you don't have to click on every single one.
Exactly. You just acknowledge them and let them pass by. And what's interesting is that neuroscience actually supports this idea. Have you ever heard of the default mode network? It's basically this network in the brain that's active when we're not focused on anything specific. And it's constantly churning out thoughts, worries, to-do lists. Meditation helps us become aware of this mental chatter instead of just being controlled by it.
So we're not trying to shut off the radio completely, just becoming more aware of what's playing, maybe even learning to change the channel sometime.
Exactly. And that's where the real power lies, in that space between a thought popping up and our reaction to it.
Okay, that's really interesting. So we're starting to see how these Buddhist ideas actually connect with what science is finding out about the brain.
Yeah.
But it gets even trippier, right, when we talk about this idea of nata, which basically means not self.
It's a pretty radical concept, especially in the West, where, we're all about individual identity.
Right, we're taught from a young age to define ourselves. I like this, I'm good at that, and so on.
Exactly. But Buddhism challenges that whole idea, suggesting that the self is actually way more fluid and interconnected than we realize.
So it's less about I am and more about I am becoming.
Yeah, more like that. It's like a river always flowing, always changing, never the same from one moment to the next. And Buddhist teachings say that. Clinging to this fixed idea of self can actually cause a lot of suffering.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely see how, clinging to this rigid sense of self could lead to, a lot of suffering. If I think I have to be perfect and then I screw up,
Yeah.
that's going to hurt.
Exactly. And think about all the energy we waste just trying to protect this image of ourselves.
Right, we're always comparing ourselves to others, getting jealous or feeling defensive when someone challenges our beliefs.
It's exhausting, and it actually prevents us from really being present in our lives. And even, it can even lead us to make choices that aren't really good for us.
Which kind of brings us to another big question that Wright tackles. Are we actually in control of our decisions?
Right, like, do we really have free will, or are we more influenced by our emotions than we realize?
Exactly. It's like, who's really driving the bus here?
It's a question that's, been around forever, but Wright brings in some really fascinating research that suggests our feelings might be calling the shots more than we think.
He talks about those split brain experiments, which are kind of wild when you think about it. So for anyone who doesn't know, these experiments involved patients whose connection between the two halves of their brain had been cut.
Right, so the two sides couldn't communicate directly.
And what's crazy is that even though the two halves of their brain were basically operating independently, the patients would still try to rationalize their actions, even when those actions were clearly driven by the unconscious part of their brain.
It's like one part of the brain's making a decision and the other part scrambling to come up with an explanation, even if it has no idea what's really going on.
That's kind of freaky when you think about it, right? Like, it really challenges this idea that we have this unified self that's in control.
It is a bit unsettling, but Wright argues that it's actually incredibly empowering to understand this.
Okay, I'm curious, how so?
Because if we can start to recognize those unconscious patterns, those emotional triggers, then we can actually work with them instead of just being controlled by them.
I see what you mean. It's like once you understand the rules of the game, you can start making moves that are actually in your best interest.
Exactly. And this is where Buddhism offers some really practical tools. It's not about suppressing your emotions, but learning to observe them, to understand their true nature, and then choose how you want to respond.
This is like instead of getting swept away by every wave of emotion, we learn to kind of ride them out.
Perfectly put. And think back to Wright's example of jealousy. He talks about the research showing how this one emotion can completely hijack our system.
Oh yeah, he went into some detail there.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary how powerful it can be.
Right. We're talking drastic changes in behavior, even thoughts of violence, all triggered by this one emotion.
It's like jealousy brings out a whole other side of ourselves, which again, I guess speaks to this idea that we're not really this fixed, unchanging entity.
Precisely. We're more like a collection of impulses, desires, emotions, all in this constant state of flux. And understanding that is key to living with more, more skill and less suffering.
So then, how do we stop ourselves from just being puppets to those impulses,
Yeah.
especially in the heat of the moment?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? We've all been there, that impulsive buy at the checkout counter or that snarky comment we wish we could take back.
Tell me about it. It's like my willpower just flies out the window sometimes.
Right. And Wright uses the example of shopping to illustrate this. Like, you go in with a plan, maybe even a list, but then you're bombarded with all these tempting displays and limited time offers, and suddenly your rational brain takes a backseat.
And bam, you walk out with a new gadget you totally didn't need. Been there, done that.
And what's fascinating is that researchers have actually used brain scans to see what's happening in those moments. And guess what? The areas of the brain associated with rational thought, they're pretty quiet.
Makes sense. So what's firing up then?
The areas linked to pleasure and reward, those are lit up like a Christmas tree.
So basically, our brains are wired to prioritize that immediate gratification, even if it means totally derailing our long-term goals.
Pretty much.
Okay, so how do we fight fire with fire? How do we rewire our brains to crave those healthier rewards?
Well, Wright suggests that one of the most effective strategies is to combine reason with emotion.
Okay, so it's not just about logically listing out all the reasons why you shouldn't eat that extra slice of cake.
Right. It's about tapping into the emotional side of things, too.
So like visualizing how good you'll feel after a healthy meal, or how proud you'll be after a week of sticking to your budget.
Exactly. It's about connecting with those positive feelings, those deeper values that motivate you. By engaging both the rational and emotional parts of your brain, you're much more likely to make choices that are truly aligned with your best self.
It's like building a new neural pathway, a stronger connection between your desires and your actions.
Exactly. It takes practice, of course. But as Wright's own journey shows, even small, consistent efforts can lead to some really profound changes.
And it's inspiring to hear how other people have used these principles to transform their lives too. Like, even in the face of some really incredible challenges, like he talks about Thich Nhat Hanh. that Vietnamese monk who self-immolated
Hmm.
to protest the persecution of Buddhists.
Right, right.
And it's such a powerful image. This man just sitting there peacefully surrounded by flames. It really makes you think about the power of the human spirit.
It really does. And it shows that this whole not self thing, it's not just some abstract idea. It can be a source of incredible strength, even in the face of unimaginable suffering.
It's like by letting go of that attachment to the self, he was able to tap into a level of resilience that most of us can't even imagine.
Exactly. And Wright connects this back to his own experience with meditation. He talks about how through practice, he's learned to observe his emotions without letting them completely take over.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So he still feels them, right?
Right.
But they don't have the same power over him anymore.
So it's like instead of being controlled by those emotions, he's learned to kind of ride them out.
Yeah, like surfing almost. Those waves of emotion, they're still going to come, but instead of getting knocked down, you learn to surf.
I love that analogy. So it's not about getting rid of those difficult emotions altogether,
Yeah.
but changing our relationship to them.
Exactly. We all experience those feelings, sadness, anger, fear. It's part of being human, right? But we have a choice. We can either feed them, let them control us, or we can choose to just observe them and ultimately let them go.
And the more we practice this, the better we get at catching those waves early on before they have a chance to really knock us down.
Exactly. It's like building a muscle. That ability to pause, to observe, to choose a different path. And what's so cool is that science is actually backing all of this up.
Right. We're seeing more and more research on the benefits of mindfulness and how it can literally change our brains.
It's like we have this amazing synergy happening between ancient wisdom and modern science, and it's all pointing us towards this path of greater well-being.
It's really pretty amazing when you think about it. So I guess the takeaway here is that we have a lot more power than we think to create a better reality for ourselves, to live with more joy and less suffering.
Absolutely. But it does take work. It's not some magic bullet.
Right. It takes effort. It takes practice.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin?
I'd say it all starts with awareness. That's where meditation comes in. That's where mindfulness plays such a big role. It's about waking up to how your mind works, becoming aware of those automatic patterns and habits that might be holding you back.
And then once we're aware of those patterns, we can start to make different choices.
Exactly. We become more intentional about how we respond to challenges.
And it's not just about personal transformation, right?
Mm.
Doesn't this also have an impact on, the world around us?
Absolutely. This shift in perspective, this cultivation of compassion and wisdom, it has a ripple effect. It impacts your relationships, your community, even the world at large. We're all interconnected, right?
Wow, that's pretty powerful. So it's not just about feeling good, but about doing good as well.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes these ideas so relevant, even thousands of years after they were first shared. It's a message of hope, a call to action, and a reminder that we all have the potential to create a better world.
I love that. And hey, if you're listening to this and you're feeling inspired to learn more, we highly recommend checking out that YouTube video we mentioned. Summary of Why Buddhism is True by Robert Wright on the Quick Read channel.
It's a great place to start. And who knows, it might even inspire you to pick up the book.
Totally. And hey, maybe this will inspire you to try a little meditation or just put a bit more mindfulness into your day. Even small steps can make a big difference. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those big questions, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.